Hey, everybody, I'm excited to present for the first time my longtime friend, George Galvis. George had either the advantage or distinction or disadvantage of being my neighbor way back when we were both at 378 Van Buren Avenue.
375 Van Buren at the Senator
375 Van
Apartments.
Buren before I moved. That's
Yep,
right. I moved
right there
across
by
from
Lake
yeah.
Merritt. Yep,
Right.
yep.
Yep. Beautiful Adams Point. And this man was, I personally watched this man grow into the power that he is today. And for that, I am honored to have had that pleasure. And I want to read to you his bio of CURYJ. And George, since 1993, has promoted restorative justice and healing to transform lives. In fact, I think you're the first person, George, who taught me what the meaning of the term restorative justice, just FYI. George is the co-founder and executive director of Communities United for Restorative Justice, CURYJ. He draws from personal experience and his indigenous roots to help people, well, young people in particular, and those involved in specifically in the criminal justice system, become community leaders for positive change. And again, it's my honor, pleasure, and joy to have my longtime friend George Galvis, my great neighbor. Boy, remember those managers, man?
Man, we had some slumlords right there in Adams Point, man. It was a trip, right?
Amen. George, hey, you were heavily involved in the promotion of Prop 6.
Yes, I was part of the executive board for the ballot committee.
Yeah. What happened? Why did we lose?
Yeah, no, I think it's an excellent question. And so interestingly, there was no public opposition to Proposition 6. Yeah. And all we were merely trying to do was wordsmith the California state constitution to abolish slavery, legalize slavery, right? Something that almost every other state in the nation has already done. We are just one of 16 states out of 50 that have not yet been able to do this. And here we are in so-called progressive California. We love to pop our collar about, you know, how progressive we are, California exceptionalism and all that. And yet, you know, California is very much, I think, headquarters, which is why we've seen this influx of billionaire money from out of state and from in-state as well, because we have a lot of, like, I think this also sort of misconception, like when the tech sector began to sort of emerge. I remember the framework way back in the day was this is a new kind of wealth. This is new money. This is more progressive, right?
Yep.
And yet what we're seeing is the tech sector is actually very right-wing, white supremacist, and problematic as well. And so, you know, what we're seeing is really a grab for, you know, power and, you know, wealth, more wealth. So, you know, because people, once they get some money, it's like they have an insatiable sort of thirst. They just can't get enough. They become like Ebenezer Scrooge. You know what I'm saying? It's something about it, you know, it becomes like a sickness, and control of resources, right? And social control, right? And so while there was no public opposition, there was a whole lot of invisible opposition to Prop 6, because there are a lot of folks who profit from the warehousing of human beings from the prison industrial complex, right? One of the most powerful lobbying groups in the state of California for decades has been the California Correctional Peace Officers Association. Two, we have legalized slavery in California. And the truth of the matter is people should know that despite what we've been taught, that California was never a slave state, that is untrue. Slavery in California is older than America. It goes back to our California mission system with the Spaniards. And if you visit any of those California missions from, you know, Mission Dolores in San Francisco all the way to San Diego, which, the true history is that those were constructed by indigenous slave labor, and they served as indigenous slave plantations. And then when California
that needs to be trumpeted. I didn't know that. That needs to be trumpeted.
It does. It needs to be elevated for sure, man. Yeah. I'm kind of wary of using any term with that uses the TRUMP in it, trumpeted, or any other term at this point, just given the presidential election outcome.
Freudian slip.
I feel the sentiment. We gotta lift it up. We gotta elevate it for sure, man. So, so yes, slavery in California is older than America. And then, when California was forcibly by gun, became a part of and annexed as a part of this, United States, as and was at gunpoint, given statehood, right? That was a direct result of the discovery of gold, right? In 1849, and in 1850 they passed what were called the Red Codes, and the Red Codes were a series of laws, in California that some of what they did is they legalized slavery for California natives, and what they did is they used these vagrancy laws, which are like old, and we're seeing the resurgence of these vagrancy laws now with the United States Supreme Court. Really allowing the criminalization of tent cities and vagrancy and home and people who are houseless. You know what I'm saying?
Oh.
And what they said, so first they steal the land of California natives. So now they become homeless. They become landless Indians. And it was crafted in such a way like, oh, we have compassion for these folks. They're landless, homeless Indians. And so what they're going to do is they're going to serve, for these ranchers. You know what I mean? And they use the criminal legal system and these vagrancy laws for so-called landless Indians to basically legalize enslavement. So there was legalized slavery of California Native people here in California through these 1850 Red Codes. And one of the things it did that, is also just truly disgusting is it facilitated sexual human trafficking of particularly Native girls and women in California. It legalized rape of young girls by ranchers, by miners, by settler colonizers here in California. So that is a deep part of California's history that we have not been taught. Like when I was in fourth grade and we did the whole kind of section on California missions, they were romanticized.
Yes, that's right. Still
we were
are
never
today.
taught about the history in the state of California of what we refer to as the 3 Gs: greed, right?
Yep.
Gold, and genocide.
Yeah.
Right? So it's important to note that now California, we have had, we've historically had for the last 3 decades or longer, the largest New Age slave plantations in the nation, because essentially that's what prisons are as a result of the 13th Amendment, right? The very first, prisons in the context of the United States were the slave plantation and the reservation. And make no mistake about it, because the reservation, as much as people think of it now as sort of homelands for indigenous nations, in federal Indian law, it's explicit that these are actually prisoner of war camps. The reservation is a prisoner of war camp.
I want to ask you about something that I've discovered, in part based on what my company does. And we had 4 clients, but this shocked me. And then I thought, okay, here it is again. You and I are talking about basically forced slavery. Yep. All right. But if I type California, you probably have seen this before, but I want to know what California Prop 6 in Google.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. First, we get this result: ballot measures, California Prop 6, fine, prohibits slavery and involuntary servitude. So far, so good, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We saw the outcome. But then we get to the press. This is where things get interesting, George. Look at this
framework. So this is what I wanted to kind of step into, is really, when we look at the role of billionaires and people, powerful folks, who's controlling the narrative from the media, from particularly the corporate media right now.
Right.
This was framed by the San Jose Mercury News as quote unquote convicts refusing to do their chores.
Yes, that's what I'm,
and
look at this, George, look at this wording.
That
California prohibition ban forced prison labor trials, not slavery.
Right.
I'll shut up.
No one is using the term slavery. What is involuntary servitude?
Right.
What is it's like everything was very much sugar-coated. Even the language, right, that was drafted on. So the language that people read as they were voting really minimized what this actually does, right? And so that's because there were very many powerful folks, including, we're fairly confident Governor Newsom was very much against Prop 6.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. In
I'm gonna
fact,
get
even
back. Wait. I'm gonna get to my boy.
yeah, yeah. So, he was very, I think, strategic in not being public about his opposition, because it's not a good look for someone who wants to run for president someday to say that they supported legalized slavery in their state constitution. But, we experienced a lot of adversity just to try to get this out of the legislature as an assembly constitutional amendment to be placed on the ballot, right? Even by the people who were seemingly our allies. So it should have never actually, had the legislature had its way, it would have never been placed on the ballot. It's only because of the organizing, which, I'm a proud co-founder of a movement, a little something something called All of Us or None, movement of formerly incarcerated people who have the audacity to speak in our own voice around these issues, right? And All of Us or None mobilized to the California, Democratic State Convention and began talking with folks. And, reason as you would expect when you talk to people about what this actually is, there's genuine support for abolishing legalized slavery, right? In our state, from our state constitution. And they decided to endorse it. And that's the only reason why it survived. So to be quite frank, even the author, Assemblymember Lori Wilson, who's a member of the a member of the Black Caucus in the state assembly, attempted to kill this.
Huh.
And we believe that was probably as at the behest of Governor Newsom and her interest in climbing up gaining political favor and climbing up the political ladder. So she, as the author, which she inherited from Comlager, who was previously an assembly member who's since joined Congress, right? But this really came from the ground up. This is not something new. Like, this is something back in 1997 when I began organizing with folks like Dorsey Nunn and Angela Davis for the first critical resistance conference at UC Berkeley, beyond the prison industrial complex. We were talking about the 13th Amendment and the legal loophole that maintained slavery in this nation. We were talking about prisons as new age slave plantations. And Dorsey Nunn, probably more than anybody else, was really like the most fierce and vocal advocate around, this being a critical part of the freedom struggle was abolishing legalized slavery, right? And he was also really instrumental in, pushing this effort through. And so, I say that, this effort for Prop 6 was much bigger than a ballot initiative. For those of us, when we look particularly at legalized slavery of indigenous people here in California, the obvious legacies of slavery and colonialism for our folks of African descent in this nation. And then who makes up the majority of people behind the prison walls? It's Black and brown people of African and indigenous descent, right? And that this is, our ancestors, man, they fought, they bled, they wept, they scrubbed floors, they died so we could be here.
Yep.
Tremendous sacrifices were made in order to advance the freedom struggle. And so we have an incumbent responsibility to create a better world for our descendants. So this was more than a ballot initiative. This was really about a movement, and this was about us, present day, being good ancestors and
I want to ask you
that legacy of freedom struggle.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I want to ask you, what do you think of this? The New York Times, supposedly the bastion of liberal thought in America.
Yeah,
right?
Not quite, but yeah.
And that's why I left it there. I'm thinking, but look, a California ballot measure to ban forced prison labor. I'm thinking, okay, there is something really wrong here. And then what are your thoughts about what we're seeing here? Because what you're saying to me, if I hear it correctly, if you don't think I'm hearing it correctly, let me know. What I hear you saying is that the prison industrial complex is really beyond the borders, the walls of the prison, and it goes as far as the media itself.
Absolutely. And what we need to look at is, so for example, there was another ballot measure that was on the ballot that overwhelmingly passed, and that's Proposition 36. And the truth of the matter is Proposition 36 is inextricably linked, because Prop 36 is going to take us back to the antiquated, draconian war on drugs, right? Petty drug possession, and minor crimes like petty shoplifting in California have been elevated from infractions or misdemeanors up to felonies, right? And this is going to create a new age of mass incarceration. And the truth of the matter is mass incarceration nearly bankrupted the state of California. We spend nearly $138,000 a year to incarcerate one person. And the truth of the matter is one of the most frequently shoplifted items in the state of California are things like baby diapers and baby formula. So these aren't just these sort of big shoplifting rings that are out there, shoplifting items and placing them on eBay or Amazon. And there's a whole nother conversation that we need to talk about these sort of platforms, these tech platforms that also benefit, right, from stolen goods and and the whole kind of underground economy commerce, right?
Yeah.
But
there was a guy that was actually in jail for a long time for one of those platforms.
Yeah. So, but what I wanted to say is that these are generally just low income families and parents who are struggling to survive. And the truth of the matter is, as a result of COVID, as a result of the pandemic, what we experienced was the exploitation of what happened during that time. And we've seen increased costs of everything. And let's be clear, it is not authentically inflation because it's not as a result of disrupting, the pandemic disrupting sort of like freight transit and exported goods and materials and things that are required to manufacture the things before they reach us in the store that have added cost or delay and then create like a supply and demand sort of formula. That's not, in fact, the case. This is driven by corporate greed. Corporate profits have skyrocketed during the pandemic. Billionaires' wealth has gone, has increased by like 10 times what it was nearly 5 years ago, and yet they want more. And the Trump tax cuts were short-term, very strategically for the rest of the population. And now we are in fact going to be paying more taxes. More of our income will be going to pay taxes so that the billionaires and the multinational corporations can pay less, right? But some of those corporations that sponsor Proposition 36, like Walmart, Target, Home Depot, the truth of the matter is that Department of Justice data and all empirical research and evidence and studies show that retail theft is at an all-time high. Is at an all-time low. It is at it has gone down. It has decreased. Crime has decreased in the last 2 years, and yet they're creating a perception of a crime wave. And this goes back to kind of who controls the media. What we've seen is budget cuts of local media, television, news networks. And a very cheap way to report the news is just to report on crime. So while crime has gone down, the reporting of crime has gone up, right?
And very often, I would like to add,
but
as NEC2, we'll let you know who our clients are, no problem. But by that, you don't see who's paying, whether for-profit or profit. Just want to add that because you're right on. And the reason is, George, is because you can't make money selling, ads on newspaper. Ad revenue doesn't pay the freight to run a news organization anymore. That's the dirty little secret. So
that's right. This is about clickbait.
Yep.
And the truth of the matter is most people get their news online now, and it's all about clicking on the story and then the ads that pop up when you click on those stories. And, one of the quickest ways to get clickbait is sensational news related to crime. It's kind of like when you're driving by that car accident. Why is it that instinctively, no matter how much anybody tries when they're driving by that accident, the scene of an accident, a car accident on the side of the road, everybody rubbernecks, looks that way and stares, and then it creates a traffic jam.
Oh, by the way, George, but here's the dirty little secret behind that. You can't even make money like you used to that way. Why? Because the linkage organizations like Facebook, you put something on Facebook and everything, they have actually put no follow codes. I'm getting a little in the weeds here, but I apologize. No follow codes so that your platform or your thing you're putting out there can't get any link juice from them. They'll be ranked higher so you can get benefit. So what
that's right.
Is that what
that's right.
What happens? You say, well, how do I pay for it? Well, I got to get a company.
And so the point that you're making for people who may not be as familiar to, and kind of like, getting into those weeds is that people right now like all these social media platforms, they profit from influencers.
Yep.
The difference is that influencers don't necessarily benefit in the same way. So while you're creating all of the content, and you're the one who's doing all of the labor, right, that creates a media following you, you don't actually benefit from those advertisements.
That's
the
right.
social media platform does. And so it's really exploitative when you think about it. Very, very exploitative.
Oh yeah.
Because
that's why I started my own company.
When you think about content on the news networks on television back in the day, you have a sitcom, you have a game show, you have a drama series. It's like the network has to pay for the production, all of those things. That means all the people who work on the set of on the studio, all the actors, everything is funded, and then they benefit from the advertising dollars. Now content is being produced at no cost to the platform. It's at the expense of the person, the influencer who's developing the content, and yet they don't even get to reap the benefits in terms of the advertising dollars and the clickbait that they generate.
And then get this, if you do start your own company and your website, and you go after the San Francisco Chronicle because your client doesn't like what they're writing about them, your client happens to be a Latina, all right, who they don't want to hear, they will hire a hacker in France to try to take your site down, because that happened to me, and they fail because I know what to do on coding. That's how deep this crap has gone. And these people are feeding the prison industrial complex.
So my point, my point being is that Walmart and all those folks who, in fact, like I said, retail crime has gone down, reporting of crime has gone up, and Walmart and those folks are some of the biggest beneficiaries in contracting prison labor. And we already know they exploit the hell out of folks in our communities, because so much so that it's common knowledge that Walmart, when they onboard new employees, will have their new employees fill out food stamp applications and other sorts of subsidies, which means that they are in fact the ones who are being subsidized. It's actually a form of corporate welfare, because we are subsidizing their employees because the wages they pay them are so low that it is not a livable wage for them to be able to house themselves, to be able to afford the groceries that they're stocking in those stores. And what an absurdity that is, you know what I mean? And yet it's taxpayer dollars then that have to subsidize them. And now we're subsidizing them through the form of prison slave labor, because when they contract with prisons, and there's even advertising and promotional videos generated by the California Department of Corrections reaching out to multinational corporations saying you are guaranteed to have a captive labor force that's going to show up to work every day, no sick days, no none of that. Well, that's part of what this was really about. This wasn't about people in prison refusing to do chores. That was such the most insulting, dehumanizing, absurd narrative I've ever heard. Shame on the San Jose Mercury News, you know what I'm saying? Editorial board for that narrative, and anybody else who repeated it. But what it is about is fundamental human rights. And so when you are incarcerated, oftentimes you have opportunities to participate in programs that are part of your rehabilitation, educational programs, your healing, your recovery. And the truth of the matter is over 90% of the people in prison are eventually going to be back in our communities. So we have an incumbent responsibility to prepare them to come back, and we should want them to be able to come back into communities in a healthy way, to be able to contribute in healthy ways, right? And when we don't prepare them for that, then shame on us, right? And let's just remove rehabilitation from CDC, because it's technically, their legal name is California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, but most everybody can tell you rehabilitation is not happening. Certainly not by the prisons. Where you do see it happening in places like San Quentin, where there's a lot of programs, it's not happening as a result of the prison and the prison administration. It's happening as a result of all the community-based nonprofits in the Bay Area that are going on their own time and dime through the funding that they generate to work with people inside, to do innovative programs that support and, support them when they come home, and reduce recidivism and do a lot of transformative healing work. So, what happens when you're incarcerated and you now are a legalized slave behind the walls is they can require you to do something that normally in the community would require gloves, a mask, because you're being exposed to harsh chemicals, goggles, and they don't have any obligation to provide you with any of that safety gear. So you can be forced to do a work assignment that is literally killing you. as a result of the toxic fumes and exposure that that you're getting as a result of that work assignment. The other thing is, if you have a loved one, you're a parent and your child dies, everyone is a child and you're somebody's baby and your parent dies. Like, can you imagine getting the news of a loved one, a family member, and then being told that you have to go to a work assignment, and refusal of the work assignment if you're not being provided with proper safety and health equipment, and if you're or you're trying to grieve for a loved one and you're distraught, understandably, because of that loss, can result in an additional 10 to 15 years on your sentence.
Whoa.
And then ultimately, it's about exploitation. What we're doing is we're incentivizing these bad companies like Walmart and others who contract with prison labor and are actually passing laws to create more new age slaves behind the walls in these prisons through things like state ballot initiative Proposition 36. Well, they benefit, through these contracts, because they only have to pay 3 cents, 7 cents, or nothing. They can, you know what I mean? It's like really kind of arbitrary, right? And yet we're spending as taxpayers $138,000 a year to incarcerate them. So once again, we are subsidizing these big multinational, big box retail companies who are bad actors.
Curious.
Yeah.
The prison workers who are affected by this not being protected are working with staffers, right?
That's right. So it's at the discretion of the staff. So any correctional officer can say, that can make the decision as to whether or not you're able to work, and can order you to do a work assignment. And what this is also,
here's my question though.
Real quickly, one more point I want to make, Zenny.
Yeah, sure.
In our women's prisons, what this has done is it's actually translated into the rape of women prisoners. So staff, like we just seen in the federal prison in Dublin, major, just countless scandals and incidences of rape and sexual abuse, right? And this happens in our women prisons. This has been happening. It's been documented by Human Rights Watch and many other organizations for decades, right here in California. And the prison staff can order a work assignment, and if the woman refuses, an additional 10 to 15 years. And oftentimes, under the guise of one of these work assignments, is when they're sexually assaulted and when they're raped by prison staff.
Hey, what I'm getting at is, if the workers are not protected in terms of COVID, isn't it more likely that the prison staff will be affected too?
So interestingly, when COVID first broke out, how do you think COVID got in the prisons? Because it's already an insular sort of bubble, right? And they're not really being exposed to public. And so here's this virus. It's migrating internationally. It's spreading. It was brought in literally by prison guards and prison staff who refused to mask up and refused to provide the protective, just basic protective things like soap. Like, you're given a bar of soap that's supposed to last you 2 weeks, and really it may last like 4 days, 5 days. And then you're being told that that's all you get, which means you can no longer wash your hands. So you're not really being provided with the necessary safety and health items that are required to protect you, right, from a virus, a deadly virus, right? You're not being provided with masks. During these work assignments where you're being exposed to super toxic chemicals that can burn your eyes, your skin, your respiratory system, and slowly kill you, they're not required to protect you with those, because prison labor is not regulated by California Office of Safety and hazardous, the way every other industry is, right?
How come there's not a law to stop that?
It's not regulated by Cal OSHA. What's that?
George, how come there's not a law to stop that? That's criminal.
Well, because people don't care about folks in prison, man. Once you're incarcerated, you're dehumanized, you're seen as subhuman, and it's the same narrative historically that they've used to commit atrocities against Black and Indigenous people. How can you
basically what you're saying? I gotta ask this. What you're saying basically is the people who are not caring are not realizing that we could be fermenting the next form of the virus from out of the prison that gets into the public.
Absolutely.
That's what I'm.
And the other thing too, the other thing that's important to point out that I was trying to illustrate a little bit earlier, but I didn't quite complete my thought, was really around the issue of rehabilitation. So you have opportunities to participate in programs that are going to facilitate rehabilitation, that are going to prepare you to go to the parole board. and when you go to the parole board, they want to see things like that you've accumulated some education, you've gotten your GED, you've completed some college courses, you've participated in completed certifications or programs. They're going to help support you with getting some viable employment when you come home. But you cannot participate in those programs if you're being given these other sorts of menial work assignments. So it's not like you're not actually working. It's not like you're just kicking back your feet. It's really about having some discretion and choosing and having a balance that's not determined by administration and correctional officers, on any whim that they have, for you to actually stay busy in other ways that may be constructive to you coming home and being a healthy member of your community when you return, right? And so it becomes an equation of exploitation versus rehabilitation. And companies like Walmart, who contract with prison labor, they don't care about your rehabilitation. They'd rather keep you in prison because that's free, that's once again, cheap labor. It's slave labor for them, and they contract with prisons, and they're the ones who are going to benefit from Proposition 36, which is going to make us less safe. It's going to easily cost us over $1 billion, and that's just in the short term, because we saved nearly $1 billion when Prop 47 was passed. And what we were able to do as a result of that is invest in rehabilitation programs and education, job training programs, mental health, and things that we know actually do keep us safe, because the safest communities don't have the most prisons. They don't have the most police. They got the most resources.
We can go on for another hour, and we got to have you back because now I'm real mad.
Yeah. Anybody listening, I hope, is mad.
Yeah.
I would say I wouldn't trust anybody who isn't angry when they learn about this.
And what gets me is people's inhumanity of people, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
And then that this is an example of our outside system quite literally holding this in place. Those media organizations could have used the title of the initiative, but they deliberately did not. And it seems to me, I wonder what you think, we'll close out, that they actually engineered the no. Am I fair in saying that?
I think that it's very fair to speculate that those invisible opponents to Prop 6 were the same people who supported and invested in Prop 36, the same folks who are, buying our elections and investing in recalls that are going to cost taxpayers more money in order to force an agenda where we create more taxes, for the working class, and we provide tax cuts for the wealthiest and for our multinational corporations, and that there is less regulation of those companies, right? Less oversight, and even just workers' rights. And that's what they're pushing for. This is a grab for power, for control, and for more money. And we are creating, really a new age feudal system here in the United States, where we have the widest gap between rich and poor that we've ever seen, And so, we have to make some radical changes, right? Colonialism is a hell of a drug. We saw a lot of people vote in ways that were against their own interests, and it's based on media. And when we look at who controls the media and the brainwashing that's happening, it's deeply, deeply concerning about the impact that it's having on our democratic process.
George, you got to come back. That's the last word right there, man. Hey, George, stick around in the background. Everybody, join us later. Subscribe to Zenny62 on YouTube and bookmark ZennyReport.com and Zenny62blog.com. That ends this broadcast. George, don't move a muscle. I got you.